What's up, YouTube? You guys ever wondered how to get your drums to cut through more in the mix when it comes to electronic and hip-hop music? Well, today we're going to learn a bit about compression and saturation to make your drums really cut through and knock. Let's get into it. Okay, so I've gone ahead and opened up a session of FL. I've gone ahead and made some chords in Keyscape. So an 808, just playing the root notes of those chords. It's in B flat major, I think. We also have some vocal chops laid on top, and then a bunch of percussion. So for the most part, a lot of this percussion is sort of treated samples. They kind of have a certain sound to them, sound pretty good already. As you build up your sample library and save sort of things you like, a lot of them will end up having this sort of sound. Maybe you've saved stuff from other sessions that you've already processed to your liking and build your own sample packs. But today, with the kick drum and the snare drum, I'm gonna be using some samples that in my opinion sound sort of mediocre and generic. They don't sound as well processed as a lot of the packs you can get nowadays, so that you can follow from home even if you are just starting out and wanna make your instrumentals sound better. So here's the snare drum we're gonna be using. In contrast to a lot of trap stuff nowadays, you can hear the higher, sort of more brittle frequencies that have been crushed out in this sample are kind of what make it cut through in the mix. And here's the kick we're gonna be using. It kind of doesn't sound the punchiest. A lot of stuff nowadays has really good low end, and again, is sort of being crushed in the high end to really try and make it cut through a loud mix. So, let's hear the instrumental as it is. Again, the volume isn't great on these samples, so we can go ahead and normalize these for the ones that aren't super loud. That's improved the volume a bit, but again, they're not punching through. We don't want to necessarily just crank the gain on these. So let's start by adding an EQ. You can do it with the FL EQ. I'll just use the Fab Filter Pro Q3, which is also a graphic EQ. This way we can actually hear, zone in on just hearing the frequencies that we're targeting. So let's solo the kick drum. I see a lot of people nowadays trying to boost the way their kick drum hits by adding a low shelf and then just trying to crank it. This is not a great way to do things, because you do boost some of these low frequencies you want to hear, but you can see all these frequencies down here below 30 are not going to be heard on almost any speakers. You're not really doing yourself a favor in adding anything down there. So let's go ahead and change this back to a bell. And we can click on this headphones icon to hear just the frequency we're targeting. I'm going to sort of roll this up until I hear the sort of the pitch of the kick drum. That's how I kind of choose to pick where I want my low first cue to be. You can sort of hear that it sort of almost sounds like bendy, like whoom, whoom. I like to choose that part to emphasize. And then also, in a lot of electronic music, you're gonna want to add a band sort of in the 250 range, maybe 300, just under there, as that's gonna be a lot where you cut the muddiness in a lot of other elements of your mix. So adding it in here can really add in some tone, like bring out the tone in your kick drum, as well as just make it punch through. So that's already sounding pretty good. You can go ahead and do some cutting here too. Some people like to use a high shelf to just cut out the high end, but as we're trying in this particular sample is trying to crush it a lot more, that's not what we're gonna go ahead and do. Next, we're gonna use some form of clipping. You can do this in a number of ways, like any sort of distortion plugins. The way I prefer to do this is use the Fruity Wave Shaper, and if you go to their Fast Distort 1, this sort of emulates what is going on when you go to their sampler and you boost the sample on with the clip enabled. it sounds a lot like that. So you can actually do that sort of clipping later in the chain. So I'm gonna back off the gain of it. So we want to kind of just be sort of starting to clip. We don't want to be going up into the high end of things. Next, we're going to add a compressor. I'm going to go ahead and use the 1176 by UAD Blue Stripe. I really like this compressor, but any compressor will do. I want to be making it so that we're only reducing about 3 dB to 6 dB a gain, and I want to play with the attack so that I'm letting through the transient, but not letting through the buzziness afterwards. As much as we can cut back on that high end to try and just make the punch through. And we want the release quick enough that it's sort of returned to 0 by the time the next one's hitting. We can also increase back the gain to make up for how much we're cutting. So already we're sounding a lot punchier. If we unsolo it, sounding a lot better. Lastly, you're gonna wanna add some saturation. I like the sausage fattener because it has 2 bands I can control here, but you can also do it with some form of tape saturation. And let's just drop back the gain so that we're sort of keeping it in the same sort of range. A good rule of thumb, when this is soloed, you want your kick drum sort of in the -3 to -6 dB range as a good rule of thumb. So that's already sounding a lot better. Let's go ahead and do the same thing with the snare drum. I'll show you can do it with just the stock plugins as well. I'm gonna go ahead and cut the low end. You don't need this for most snare drums. You can see it's not even adding any frequencies here, so it's just good practice to cut the frequencies that you don't necessarily need for that instrument, because it might have some noise down there that you're not necessarily hearing, and everything you can save helps out. I'm gonna cut out in some of these muddy frequencies, 500 to 600, because we really want the Rhodes to poke through there. So removing some of this will kind of let us increase the volume later and sort of give us that more brittle sounding snare with the high highs. We could even emphasize this point as well. I'll add in another channel strip, the Avalon EQ, and we're gonna go ahead and increase the mids and high end. Sort of the 1.4K range is gonna give you a lot of snap to that snare drum. You can also play with switching it to mic mode. That really makes, it increases the gain, and you can sort of make it break up by doing that. And then we can reduce the gain that we've added to keep it back in a good volume range. Now let's go ahead and add in our compressor again. Let's do the 1176. Wrong one. That is the message you get when it's not one of the ones you own. For UAD, they install all the plugins on your computer when you get any of them, so kind of a crazy way of doing things for UAD. I'm gonna wanna let enough of the attack come through before crushing. I'm just trying to play with the tail of the snare. I can be more liberal on my use of how the slow I'm being with the release, because the snares are more widely spaced. I'm not gonna cut the next transient. Sort of in that range is sounding good to me. Next, let's add the sausage fattener again. That way we can add the high saturations, maybe a little bit of the low. And let's bring back the volume for what we've added. Lastly, let's add some reverb to this. I like to keep a low mix level on my reverb, and that allows me really to get a longer reverb time and let the snare ring out, but not be super washy. Another thing you're going to want to do is cut the low frequencies of your reverbs, because as these pile up with a lot of reverbs in your session, it's going to make your whole mix sound quite muddy, and it kind of helps clean up and make a lot more room for other things. So now that we have things sounding pretty good, let's go back to the beginning and hear with everything off. I'll try and increase a bit the volume to try and make up for what we lost. So now let's hear it again with everything turned on. So you can really hear the punchiness of the sort of beater of the kick. Another thing you can kind of do to help this is you can have a hi-hat that hits every time the kick drum hits, and this can kind of give the semblance of putting a mic right where the beater was hitting the drum back in the day, so that you don't just get the low end, you get the clickiness of where the drum's being hit. So we've gone ahead and done that, and that really can sometimes help make your kick drum punch through. So that's everything for today, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the tutorial. Hopefully you can take something from this to your sessions and improve all your drums. Thanks.